and I wanted to talk a bit about history of statistics and epidemiology. I'm a data scientist, a statistician, so history is not my topic. But when you're learning about statistics and learning about epidemiology, you'll hear about all these very big studies and methods that that people came up with in the past, and most of these will be done by men who are all big names. So everyone's heard of John Snow and his Cholera Map of London, Austin Bedford Hill, Richard Dole. I've got, I think, Sir Francis Galton and Carl Pearson on there, and I used to work in the Farr building at UCL, which is named after William Farr, so he's a big name statistician who's got a building named after him, who did lots of work on live tables, looking at mortality rates in the UK. But there's very few women who are named when you're learning about statistics, and you can see that here as well. We've got some nice signs there with all the big name past presidents of the Royal Statistical Society. I don't know how far, at the bottom there's just the woman in front of here, Deborah Ashby is on there now. There's just 4 women on that whole list. So there's not that many big names in there. But when I was doing my PhD, I walked past this sign every day in the morning. This is put up in the Royal Free Hospital. If you go into the Rowland Hill entrance, this is there in the Royal Free Medical School. So it's one of the first places for the educated women to become doctors. And there's a whole list of distinguished students who studied at the London School of Medicine for Women. And because I was walking past it every day, I started, and there's very little information on this board. It just says names that they won a medal or a scholarship in a year. So I started Googling some of these names because I just wanted to figure out what these women do to end up on here. For most of them, there's very little information that you can find. They're all medical doctors, so they're all, and they got their medical doctorship pretty early on in time, so they're pretty good at that. But there's one name that stood out there, which is Janet Elizabeth Lane Claypon. She won a scholarship and a gold medal, so that's already pretty good, even being on that list. But then it turned out she'd done a lot of pretty amazing stuff, and very few people actually know about her. So after I dug into her past a bit, I wrote something about her for Significance magazine a few years ago for another day that celebrates women in science, Ada Lovelace Day. It's in October, so something to look forward to in a few months. And I found out that she was a doctor, one of the first doctors in the world. She was both a medical doctor and she had a doctorate from the London School of Medicine for Women. But she was also a pretty good statistician and epidemiologist, and I've just put 3 of her main accomplishments on there. She was the first person to use the t-test for non-beer related statistics. I'll go into that a bit later. She did the first attempt at correcting for confounding using real-world data. Before her, there had been some people looking at it, but they were looking at confounding more in a theoretical way. And she did the first case control study. And very few people know about her. So when I was invited to talk about her today, I thought, like, yes, I want more people to know about this pioneer of epidemiology and statistics who, lived almost 100 years ago, but she did so much great work and hardly anyone knows about her. But just to start off her story, she did most of her work, or she was educated and did a lot of her work at the London School of Medicine for Women, which was established in 1874, so it's a long time ago, and it was part of the Royal Free Hospital, which now is over in Hampstead, but at this time it was still over in central London near Russell Square. If you go to the Brunswick shopping centre and you go out on Hunter Street, you can see this building. It's still got the name, it says here, London School of Medicine for Women. The plaque is still above the building today, and there's a very nice falafel place just up the road from it, so you can go get falafel and then walk past this and think about all the amazing women that went there. And it was a pretty good medical school, because the dean at the time was Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, who was the first female physician in the UK, so it already had, early on, some pretty big names attached to it. And Dr. Janet, she stayed there a long time. She got a BSc, then she did a doctorate in physiology, and she did her MD in the end in 1910, so she spent a lot of time there. And this all happened pretty close down the street from here in London. And part of this, as doing her PhD, you need some money for doing your research, and she got one of the very first MRC scholarships. So there's still lots of people getting MRC scholarships this day to do PhDs. At the time it wasn't called MRC yet, it was the British Medical Society, but it changed names a few times. And she got some money to study the developmental histology of the ovary and hormonal control of lactation. So this is part of her doctorate in physiology. And this is one of the reasons why she ended up on that board at the Royal Free Hospital. So she got the scholarship to do the work, but then the work was so good that they also awarded her a gold medal for doing this. And then her work was covered in the very first ever textbook on reproduction physiology, which was published in 1910. But on the cover, unfortunately, there's only the names of the male authors of the book who they wrote most of the text, so they did reference her work, but she didn't end up being acknowledged there. However, after she did her PhD, she did end up in a really good place that looked after her a bit better. The Lister Institute of Preventive Medicine. That was the very first medical research charity in the UK. The building that she worked in is also still here in London. It's near Chelsea Bridge. If you're a cyclist, you know it's the awful bridge that it has a cycle path when you go on it, but it stops halfway through. It's very memorable if you've ever gone over it, but it's got this nice building at the end where Janet Lane Claypon did a lot of her work. And she moved there in 1907 after she did her PhD, but while she was still working on getting her MD, to study bacteriology and biochemistry of milk. So she was a bit more into the lab sciences at this point. But she figured out that wasn't really where she wanted to go, and she managed to get a Jenner Fellowship, because even then they were naming fellowships after big names. So this was named after Edward Jenner, who came up with the smallpox vaccine. And she got money from them to travel through Europe for 2 years, to study maternal and child health programs in other countries and see what they were doing there, which proved really useful for her work later on. And this is a picture from the people who worked at the Lister Institute when she was there in 1907. It's pretty easy to pick out the two women. So you've got Janet, who's sitting in the dark dress here on the end, and in white there's another woman who worked there, Harriet Chick, and she's a really famous scientist as well. MRC gave her a scholarship as well, and they've written something about her as well. She was one of the first people who figured out that getting sunlight and liver cod oil was a really good way to prevent rickets. But they're easy to pick out from the picture there. And while she was there, she started her first major cohort study. There'd been a few other studies that could have been called a cohort study before, so it's not quite sure whether this is the very first cohort study that was ever done, but it was one of the very first major ones. And it was the title of this was a report to the local government board upon the available data in regard of the value of boiled milk as food for infants and young animals. And it's published in 1912, so it's a really long time ago now. But it's one of the very first ones where someone collected a lot of data on a lot of children. She had almost 500 children in this cohort study who were fed breast milk or cow's milk. So it was one of the very first big ones. And she was also very meticulous in collecting her data, which for the time was a bit revolutionary. So she's got lots of tables in this report. This report is really nice because it's all available online, so you can just look it up. It's all open and see all of the hundreds of tables that she's got in there. So she's recorded exactly how many people she's recruited, which day, how old they were when she recruited them, and she's recorded age in days, and how long she followed them up. So this is the table for the 300 infants that were on breast milk, and she's followed them up for a whole year, and she's got all that information nicely tabled up there. And then in the end of the study, this is what she came out with at the end, which looks like a very simple diagram that you can make 100 of these a day now. But she was actually following up children very frequently. So she actually went to Berlin to do the study because she wanted to measure growth in babies. So she measured their weight every 8 days of all these 500 children. And she did this in Berlin because they had consultation bureaus there where people brought their children in every week. And then she had a nice group of people from a comparable background who were all coming in very frequently to get their children measured. And this graph is showing over 1,600 data points that she all put together manually and then had to average out for all these 500 children weight data for every week for over a year to put it in a graph. So it's slightly more work than we have today making graphs. But it's one of the first times where someone showed that there's difference in weight gain whether you feed children breast milk or cow's milk. As I mentioned, she recruited children in Berlin. And one of the more revolutionary things she also figured out is that confounding can be a thing. So in her report she said, does not, however, necessarily follow that the difference of food has been the causative factor, and it becomes necessary to ask whether there can be any other factor at work which is producing the difference found. The social class of the children seemed as a possible factor, and it was considered advisable to investigate the possible significance of any difference which existed between the social conditions of the homes. So in this study, like the whole study design was pretty revolutionary already, but then she also tested whether there was actually a difference between these cow's milk and breast milk groups using the t-test, which was the first time it was used outside of the Guinness factory. And then she also tested for confounding, so she wanted to see whether her social class was explaining the difference. And she had also recorded data on father's occupation, so she used the correlation coefficient, Pearson's correlation coefficient, which was published just 3 years earlier, so it was pretty novel, to actually see whether there was an association there as well. And then she concluded that the evidence dealt with throughout this report emphasizes very forcibly the importance of breastfeeding for the young of all species. Because she didn't just do a cohort study. Her report, if you read the whole thing, it's 60 pages long. She's also got a lot of reviews on all the literature. She looked at everything that was available at this time, because she had her PhD in physiology, so she knew about everything. So it's a very extensive report, and it's stuff that's still being used today. And then after she did this magnificent cohort study, she took a brief stint where she did something else, and she became the Dean of Household and Social Sciences Department at King's College for Women, which is like these old names for departments. After she's been there for a while, she moved to the Ministry of Health, where she became a civil servant doing research, and she did a big study on cancer epidemiology. So after doing one of the first cohort studies, she figured this wasn't study designed to answer all questions. We also need a completely new, at the time, study design, which is a case control study, which she used to look at causes of breast cancer. And this study was published a few years later in 1926. And again, this was a massive study for the time. Like, this would be big if you do it now. Like, just think of the ethics applications you have to do of recruiting almost 1,000 women from 8 different hospitals. I think the ethics applications might have been slightly easier for her at the time, being a physician and going into hospitals. But just actually collecting the data from all these women and just finding these women, it's a massive effort for one person. And she didn't just stop at being revolutionary and coming up with a whole new study design with the case control study. She also thought up the idea of a questionnaire, which hadn't been used before. And in her report, she says it was a very full questionnaire that was filled up for each case, and she had over 50 questions on a whole range of factors that she thought might be related to breast cancer. And at the time, people didn't really know what might be related to breast cancer. She was the first person to delve into it, and she really tried to look at as many things as possible. So if you come across a questionnaire, which we now get multiple ones of those a day for everything you buy online or buy in stores, she's to blame for that a bit as well. And so this was also published by the Ministry of Health, and unfortunately this study is a bit harder to find. I've been trying to actually see what's in it, but there's only some snippets that are available online, and City of Westminster Library is supposed to have it, but they can't find it, so I haven't been able to actually read it. But from the people who have looked at it, they say that, again, her statistics for the time was amazing. She took into account competing risks, which is something not a lot of people looked at the time. She did life table survival analysis, and she managed to pick up on a lot of risk factors that are still known about today. So she showed that breast cancer risk is increased for childless women, women who married later than average, and women who did not breastfeed. And also importantly, she found that rapid treatment was a key to survival, which unfortunately wasn't acted upon by government at the time, but it's something she found that early on. But unfortunately, that's kind of already the end of her career as well. In 1929, just 3 years after she published this second massive study, she got married, which is very exciting for most people, but she worked in the civil service, and at the time they didn't allow married women to work there, so she had to choose either marry the lover of her life or stay married to her work, and she picked marriage, which is a good choice. And she retired at the age of 52, which is still a pretty decent career. And especially since she managed in the short time that she had to publish 3 books and about 30 papers. So she did have a very productive life, but maybe she could have done even more if she was allowed to keep working. But she retired to the countryside. She lived in Sussex and on the coast, and she lived until she was 90, so yeah, she did have a pretty good time afterwards. But her data lived on, because as I mentioned, she had a lot of it, both in the study where she looked at the breast milk, just collecting all those data points for 500 babies for a whole year of life, and the breast cancer study where she had questionnaires on 1,000 women with lots of things that they'd filled out. And there were some people in the 50s, Nathan Mental and William Hensel, who came up with the Mental-Hensel correction for a confounding test. They did a lot of theoretical work on what they thought you needed to do to correct for confounding, but it's always nice if you can show that your statistical test works on actual data. And even in the 50s, the only study they could find which had the amount of data and the amount of detail that they needed to test their test on was Janet Lane Claypon's study from the 1920s. So they had to go back that long to be able to find her data. And it was still used then. And there was also, this is MPhil thesis that someone wrote in 2010 who went back to the same data again and redid her analysis the way she did them and the way we would do now if we've got slightly different tests, and he still found the same results. So you can find this paper and actually find her data because it's all digitized now. So the data is still there and still being used today. And also excitingly, at the beginning of my talk, I mentioned there's lots of big names for men. They've got buildings named after them. I used to work at the Far Institute. But excitingly, when I was doing this talk, I found that the University of Lincoln renamed one of their buildings in August last year. So their science center is now the Janet Lane Claypon building. And I only found about this last week, but now I'm definitely going to try and go to the University of Lincoln to see this building. So that's all I wanted to talk about. But finally, I wanted to also ask for a bit of fundraising, because I'm really excited about women in statistics, but we've got 100 women here, so we're doing pretty well here. But I'm also really excited about cycling. And the woman I've got in the picture there, her name is Annemiek van Vleuten, and she's, like me, she's from the Netherlands, and she's also an epidemiologist, which I'm really excited about, and she is one of the best cyclists in the world. But women cyclists, the one thing they don't have is the biggest cycling event that exists, which is the Tour de France. That's a big thing the men do for 3 weeks every year, and the women's version doesn't exist, partly because people think women can't do this. So with a few friends, I'm going to cycle the Tour de France this summer. We're doing this as a relay, so we're doing 1 week each, so not the full 3 weeks. But I'm doing this to raise some money for the William Wade's Memorial Foundation, William Wade's Memorial Trust, who raise money for for projects that support vulnerable people. So if you would like to support me in supporting women riding the Tour de France and the William Wade's Memorial Trust, you can donate some money via that link, or Google my name and Virgin Money Giving, and my name is unique enough that you should find it. So yeah, thank you very much. And here's some links if you want to read some more about Janet Lane Claypon.
Firstly, thank you very much for the invitation. It's an absolute delight. I couldn't resist doing a little bit of statistical analysis. I started when I was sitting in here at a meeting the other day, and then when I was meant to be doing something else this morning, I had another go. And it was of that President's Board, an analysis of the first names. And the first problem is that so many of the early lot have got titles, you don't even know what their first names are, so we have a missing data problem, which will be a little bit of a theme of my talk. But there are at least 5 Williams up there. So there are more Williams who've been president than women. There are at least 5 Davids up there. And, I mean, every single one that I've worked with is a really well-deserving president, but still, more Davids than women have been president. And there's at least equal numbers of George, John, and Charles. All right, so we've got some beating to do. And the question is, why? What's been going on? So what I've done for this talk is to take a very different tack to Linda's fabulous talk. So it's up to me to define present, and I've more or less defined that as when I started my undergraduate onwards. And just looking at what's been going on. So when I was still at school, the Royal Statistical Society had been going since 1834. Now, I'd not heard of it then. But something exciting happened in 1975, which was the Society had its first woman president. And Stella Cunliffe is quite a character, was quite a character. She's the one woman president who's not still with us. She was one of the first from her school to attend university. She was actually selected to be in the first group of civilians who went into the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany, which I didn't know until I started doing a bit of reading around for this. She was the first female head of the government statistical service, first female president, and there were a number of other things. She was a formidable character. I've had the pleasure of meeting her at one or two occasions, dinners when she was sort of, I think, sort of well into her late 80s and 90s, and she was still brilliant brain. So, great start. And round about that time, I went off to university, studied maths. That was how it felt then. And then I went to the School of Hygiene. That was my entire MSc year. Actually, in terms of diversity, it wasn't bad. There were 4 women, 3 men, international group. The 3 women at the front all went on to have chairs. I don't know what happened to the rest because they're international. They went off and I lost contact with them because we didn't have kind of social media in those days, which is a real shame. And then I went to the Royal Free. So I'm also a Royal Free PhD. The sad thing was that while I was there, the last woman professor retired and it went to all male, which for something that had been a women's medical school until fairly recently was a real shame. But otherwise, it was a great place. And then I went off and I stayed at the Royal Free, actually had a child there. So what was happening in the statistical world? Well, one of the things I'm going to do is to look at some of the awards the Society gave out. Now, with one exception, I couldn't find an award that was given prior to this date to a woman. I will come to the outlier, which for various reasons I put a little bit later. So the Chambers Award, which is given for service to society, and the only stipulation is it can't be somebody who's been the president. Assuming the assumption is we have to do lots of work anyway. And the first woman it was given to was Joyce Snell, who I couldn't actually find a photo of, but I'm sure I wasn't the only person here brought up on Cox and Snell, both analysis of binary data and applied statistics, which I used a lot for teaching, household name. And other people who've got it later, Sheila Bird, Jenny Lannon, all well-deserving. I have to say, this is where the missing data starts kicking in. Were those really the only 3 women who've done a lot for the Society? Because all the other medals have gone to men, but I'm afraid I haven't put them up today. We get left out most of the rest of the year, so I'm afraid I haven't listed the men. There's too many of them. They cluster the place up. Right. I then went up to Liverpool, worked with Phil Brown, who's there. Jane Hutton and I were appointed lecturers together. And Phil was great, really supportive. Actually, I remember him saying to me, back in, must have been 1987, oh, what are you doing for International Women's Day? I'd never heard of it. So, he was really quite good at consciousness raising in that sense. And we'll come to Jane a bit later. And I did other things as my little boy growing up a little bit. So if you wonder what a president of the future looks like, actually that was one. I must say at the time, nobody would have ever spotted that as being a future president. There were at least two characteristics which would have been a complete rule out. So don't think you don't look like one. Guy Medal in Bronze. So William Guy was one of our Williams, and he was one of our presidents. And we have 3 medals, which he endowed us for. And the Guy Medal in Bronze, I think, started a little bit later than the other 2, but been going since 1936. So it took 50 years, but eventually they decided that there were, and this is given to people under 35, so it's about promise. And Sarah Darby, who's pictured there at a slightly later stage of her career, has done lots of great work in cancer. She's also done lots of great work in HIV. And she got it. And we seem to be on a roll the next year. Sheila Gore got one. She's now Sheila Bird. She's sitting in the audience somewhere. Valerie Isham, of whom more later. A little bit of a lull. Is it Rosemary Poult now? I couldn't find her first name. She's listed under as R, but she worked at Rothamsted and then later on Nikki Best Fiona. Again, all incredibly well-deserving candidates. I would have hoped, on average, there would have been a few more than that, because that one is an annual award. But there are some. Greenfield Industrial Medal, that's one of our newer ones, and that's been given twice to women, once to Amy Racine Poon, who worked at Ciba-Geigy, now Novartis, and did lots of interesting work, including a great Bayesian paper that was a red paper here. That's actually a picture of Sue Lewis down at Southampton, who does work in design of experiments and did a lot of work with industry. So a couple of good ones there. Now, what's that about? I'm sorry to embarrass my daughter who's sitting in the audience. I think at this stage, there was growing recognition, and I'm talking about the late 80s now, there was growing recognition that there weren't enough women around, and a little bit later than that picture was taken, I was the beneficiary of something called Opportunity 2000, which Virginia Bottomley had championed. And what that said was that they wanted at least 25% women on government committees by the year 2000. So because of that, I only found out much later it was because of that, I got invited to join a subcommittee of the Committee on Safety on Medicines. I didn't know a huge amount about trials, I knew something, but I could think my way through things. And that was career-changing for me because I took to it like a duck to water and led me later to join the Commission on Human Medicines. I'm standing in the back row there next to a woman with a white top, Janet Derbyshire, that we'll come to in a short while. And although I don't think it was the only reason, it was one of the reasons I got an OBE, and that was 10 years ago with my slightly more grown-up children. So that Opportunity 2000, which to start with, I was slightly miffed when I found out I'd been asked to do this, partly because I was a woman, but actually I thought, there's plenty of people on these committees who were there in those days because they were white, grey-haired, middle-aged men. I thought, it's not such a bad reason. And I'm a great believer in diversity on committees. I think it's a harder call what you do for individual appointments, but certainly balance in committees and groups is vital. And that was before the RSS finally appointed its second woman president. I can't believe that we waited until pretty much the millennium to have a second one. But Denise was absolutely great. I'd worked closely with her previously because I'd been heavily involved in the RSS and she'd been honorary secretary. She had many roles. She'd been president of the International Association of Official Statistics. She'd been director of Statistics UNESCO, ESRC Data Archive, and that was kind of groundbreaking, but we shouldn't have waited that long. We did. She's now principal of Green Templeton College at Oxford. So that got us to 2. If there's any number of names there that at least 2 men would have beaten it. Then Bradford Hill, and again, Sheila was the first woman to get that, Nikki the second. That's given triennially, and a lot of good men. But there's a lot of women in medical stats. So again, we have to ask a little bit, or at least I would hope that the balance will change over the years. Our Honorary Fellows, I can't find a historical list. We tend to list the current ones. We've currently got 33. 10% of them are women. Well, just under 10% actually, if you do your sums accurately. So the first of those is Claire Short, who's actually... So Honorary Fellows, the criteria have changed a little bit over time, but essentially, they're not, in recent years, they've been for non-statisticians, but people that have been made good use of statistics. Claire Short's politician, and that was for her work on the Millennium Development Goals, which I think now have morphed into the Sustainable Development Goals. So that was why she got that. Baroness Honora O'Neill, absolutely great, does lots of work on ethics of data and other things, and she's come and addressed the society. And the third woman is Janet Derbyshire, who's the lady who was standing next to me, Commissioner of Human Medicine, and she is another epidemiologist. She is medical. She and I got a lot of committees together. She would always say, I'm not a statistician. I'd say, I'm not a medic, but we were actually known as twins for various reasons, because at some point we'd alternated on committees. She's a great statistician, actually, in any practical sense of the word, but more importantly, she's also supported and brought on a lot of other statisticians, so I think that's very well deserved. And I just love the background of that, which is all the files of data. But again, this is by nomination, so this is where some of you come in. I think somebody quoted Sally Davis yesterday, who said, women need mentors and other women make great mentors, but actually we also need to support each other and put each other forward. So if you know a woman who's not a statistician, who you think is a good friend of statistics, please put them forward. I mean, please put forward good men as well. It's not that we don't want good men, but sometimes you just have to think a little bit harder because your gut instinct isn't for a woman, oh, that's somebody who ought to be an honorary fellow. And it's not a difficult process. I've certainly, with other people, put together one or two, both one up there and others, which have been successful. So if you think you know somebody that we should have associated with society, don't rely on someone else to do it. West Medal, which is awarded for official statistics, and a couple of good people there. I couldn't find a decent photo of Angela Dale. I was trying to go for the first one. Everyone I could find of her had her mouth wide open. I thought she'd probably kill me. So Jill Leyland is our second one, and again, very well deserved. And that was last year. Guy Medal in silver. So this is our second, this is the middle one of the Guy Medals, which is given for work with society, published in the Society's journals. So it tends to be the sort of the fairly serious research end of the award. In my mind, sort of practically the first woman who got it was Sylvia Richardson, who's pictured there. She was a colleague of mine at Imperial, currently director of the MIC Biostats unit. Actually, there was a woman who got it in 1928, which is quite astonishing, Ethel Newbold. And again, I know very little about her. She was seen to be absolutely brilliant. She worked with Major Greenwood. She did lots of good work. She was on RSS Council, and she sadly died in her early 50s, which may not that. So she died, I think, in 1933, which was only 5 years after she got that medal. And that may be partly why we don't know so much about her. But it was then another, let me do my sums right, 60 years. And you thought, where were women all of this time? Or where were the people recognising women's work, more to the point? That, again, is an annual award, so anyway, things are getting a little bit better. Nancy Reid got it in 2016, and Susan Murphy has got it this year, and I'll say a little bit more about Susan in a short while. So, we have recently got where we perhaps should be on that. Well, it wasn't quite such a long wait, but we had a dreadful wait between the first and second female presidents. Third one, Valerie Isham. So Valerie was down there. You've already seen her name because she got the Guy Medal in bronze when she was younger. She's very much a sort of academic statistician at UCL, so she had been at Imperial. I could have shown her Cox and Isham book, that was another one that some of us were brought up on, because she was one of David Cox's PhD students, but then went to UCL. She does quite technical research in point processes and dynamic process and network, but also goes into very applied areas and has served on various advisory committees, including HIV, foot and mouth disease, and biological impacts of climate change. And she'd done various things in society, so that was great. And once you had three, you knew that we'd sort of broken the barrier, really. Howard Medal. So the person who gets the medal, I think, for the most medals is Sheila, and the Howard Medal is for social statistics, and I think this was for work in, if I remember rightly, for work in prisons. We list who gets them. Again, public information on what each one was awarded for is, I'm sure it's there in the Society's archives, but it's not quite so public, so perhaps on the new website we could put a bit more about what these were awarded for. So I want to say a little bit about personal things, because I've had a great career and I'm planning on doing that for some while to come. But it's been really, I've had lots of people who've supported me, but I want to mention three women in particular who I've had long and close association with. One is Sheila, that's Sheila with David Hand collecting, I'm not sure which medal that was, I'm sure she'll remember. But that's also, Sheila and I had the same PhD supervisor. We were Stuart Pocock's first two PhD students, so that's a rather nice photo, and Stuart's where he knows he ought to be, which is just slightly, staying safely behind. I think after that he thought it was safer to have male PhD students. I mean, I think he's probably had some women since, but so that's been great, and she's been incredibly supportive and a brilliant role model. Second one, and again you've seen a photo of her already, is Jane Hutton. So Jane and I were both appointed in Liverpool. We both had joint appointments between the medical school and the stats department. And the common room that I showed us standing in earlier, I remember one day one of not the senior professor I showed with us, Phil Brown, but Mike Delves, who was the professor of computational something or others, came in one day, found Jane and I sitting there along with another young woman, Nancy Cleave. He said, "Oh, Phil's certainly changed the face of this common room," and humphed and walked out again. Yeah, I mean, it was factually correct. I thought it was something to celebrate. Mike Delves clearly did not. And although we didn't get that all the time in Liverpool, it was not a place of great change. So Jane and I, we had a great time, but I think we also had some tough times. Jane has, again, done great things and is still doing great things for society, particularly working on statistics in the law. She's done a lot of work there, but she's also a great supporter of our AIMS initiative, which is the Maths in Africa. And it's not just about women, but I thought on International Women's Day, that picture of Jane with some of the people there was the one to put up. And she's also Louisa's, my daughter's godmother, so that little snippet there. Jane doesn't do Twitter, but I do. Some of you may remember a hashtag a little while ago, "Professors look like this." So that was my contribution of us at Lou's wedding. And again, I hope we've supported each other. And then finally, my daughter Louisa, who was the little munchkin on the little one on the back of the bike, went on to be a statistician. She might have got that from me. Didn't get cake baking from me. I can't bake a cake to save my life. So that's her nephew, my grandson. How many people recognise what's on there? If you can't see from the back, I can tell you they say T, Q and V. You feeble lot. Trustworthiness, quality and value. They are the characteristics of official statistics, and this was for the launch of the new code of conduct. So if you don't know what they stand for, shame on you, and I suggest you find out. Because they are much more generally applicable than just to official statistics. I thought you'd all be there before me. So she keeps me abreast of what's going on official statistics because she's in the Office of Stats Regulation these days, which keeps an eye on what the rest of government statisticians are up to. So far, lots of things to celebrate, but as I said, a bit of a missing data problem. Before I finish on a high note, I just want to talk a little bit about the curious incident of the dog in the night time. Now, if you've read the book or seen the play, some of us recognise some of the characteristics of the main character, but some of you may know this, if you don't know it from this book, from Sherlock Holmes, who said to his long-suffering sidekick Watson, "It's the dog that didn't bark." So what I just want to touch on briefly is some of what isn't there, because it's very easy to celebrate the positives, but what are we missing? What are we not getting right? Well, the first one is easy, and the sharper among you will notice that I haven't mentioned the Guy Medal in Gold. It's been awarded since 1892. That is the complete list of women who've got it. We still have our glass ceilings, even in the society. So again, this is a Lifetime Achievement Award. It's typically triennial. So there are some very eminent winners. And it's, but if you know, if you think of a woman who you think deserves it, if you don't put in a nomination, the committee can't consider it. So I hope that when one of you are giving this talk in a while, that won't be quite such a blank slide. Secondly, today is all about women, and that is great. And certainly from where I was standing when I went in, that was the most obvious lack. Diversity is multidimensional. It feels like we're sort of cracking the women issue, and certainly looking around here, I think we're well onto it. I suspect there's a lot of people who are also thinking, well, there hasn't yet been a president who looks like me. And some of that is very visible, some of that is not so visible. And it's not quite true that everyone on council is from a male from the Golden Triangle. And in fact, this year, we are at the point where 50% of people on council are now women. So that is absolutely fabulous. But I think there's a lot of other diversity that we need to think about, because different things need tackling in different ways. So I just thought I'd put that there. But anyway, so today is a day for celebration. So where are we in 2019? Well, as has been mentioned more than once, I am the 4th female RSS president, and that's actually rather nice, because I'm not the first woman, I'm not the first mother, I'm not even the first grandmother. Valerie Isham beat me to that one. So you feel that you can do your thing rather than just being the lead woman. And I've done a mixture of things and hope to do more. We are giving the Guy Medal in Silver to Susan Murphy this year, who's American statistician, and I won't read that out, but essentially she does a lot of very clever technical stats and then applies it in all sorts of interesting ways, including micro-randomized optimization of mobile health interventions. So, sort of moving very nicely between the sort of very mathematical end and very modern applications. We are giving the Barnett Award, which is again one of our new awards. This is in memory of Vic Barnett, who was treasurer of the RSS and actually very much responsible for us moving into this building, but he was into environmental statistics. And so this is an award. I think it's the most difficult one because it comes with having to give a talk. And we're giving that this year to Marion Scott for her work in environmental issues. So that's absolutely fabulous. I'm looking forward very much to presenting those two. And then this, the World Statistics Congress, International Statistics Association, is taking place in Kuala Lumpur. Because I'm president, I've got an invite. And they've got 4 presidents who are giving talks. We also get to jointly present the International Statistics Prize that, for the first time 2 years ago, was awarded to David Cox. He's being awarded to Brad Prefferon. That is the president of the American Statistical Association, the International Biometric Society, Institute of Mathematical Statistics and RSS. So Karen Kadaffa, Louisa Ryan, Susan Murphy, who I've just talked about, and myself. So I feel we need a new hashtag. Presidents look like this. Yeah, it's really nice. So lots of things to celebrate. So it just remains for me to say, Happy International Women's Day.
That's not what I just want to comment. First, congratulations. Can I just be, as I'm older than you, can I make one, and from the median of distribution rather than the 99th percentile, can I just make one or two observations? First, and they're a bit disconnected, but certainly the question of women mentorship. To know that in 1919, when the Ministry of Health was founded, they set up a division of women and child health, staffed, headed by a woman called Janet Campbell, who was certainly an associate of Janet Lane Clapon, and a staff made up entirely of women, doctors, nurses, and sanitary inspectors, including Isabella Cameron, whose name has been linked with Janet Lane Clapon. So this was a all-female setup in 1919, but of course it was addressing women's problems. Moving forward, just recollect my interview for my first job, which was with Frank Yates and Michael Healy at Rothamsted, just down the road from where I lived, and I had various family issues that I needed to clear up, so a job close to home was handy. But Frank Yates explained that we employ women on a lower grade than men because you all leave to have children. And so I decided whether I had any children or not. I wasn't going to stay there long, but I would meanwhile have excellent experience. After a year grinding a Bundesliga at UCL, I was going to be able to use electric calculator on my desk, only for me, the Hollerith counter sorter, and the computer. And so after that experience, I moved on somewhere else. And in the history of statistics section, we were talking about the women statisticians at Rothamsted, because there is an important anniversary there. And I told my story, and my friend who I knew then said, yes, she had got married, and she thought she'd have the children now because she wasn't going to get promoted at Rothamsted. She'd start again somewhere else, which she did. Just to scroll forward, having worked in a mainly female environment, again on maternal and child health and National Perinatal Epidemiology Unit, I came to City University Department of Midwifery, which when I first arrived, we sometimes hired room from the RSS. So I found myself trying to sell statistics and tell them about Florence Nightingale and statistics. And they pointed to that notice board and said, why do you have so few women presidents? So I'm glad we've got another one. But an important thing, picking up on Deborah's point in diversity, that when I arrived in the Department of Midwifery at City University, it was headed by a very distinguished midwife, Dora Opoku, and the department was, I was the minority. There were white English were definitely in the minority there. And certainly, if you have a leader, then they bring forward an improved diversity. Sadly, since Dora retired and died, the department is not nearly so diverse. So I think it's about sustainability as well. And I think those are sort of important points to make about diversity. Say, speaking from the median of the distribution, I still had a very enjoyable career.
Thank you. So, I think that indicates, in some ways, that we've got a lot to celebrate because things have changed, but also that sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But no, thanks for that, Alison. And again, someone else who's been incredibly supportive over many long years.
Congratulations, Deborah. Just a plea from the point of view of someone who has sat on the RSS's diversity group.
Okay.
And missing data is a huge problem among the RSS membership. So trying to get a grip on not just gender, but diversity issues generally. So an awful lot of RSS fellows and people involved haven't filled in their diversity information. So can we have a push as part of your presidency to make sure that we do solve some of the missing data problems?
No, that's an excellent idea, and some of it may just be documenting stuff that we'll have in our files, like those missing names, and some of it does rely on other people, and then we need to explain why we need it as well, and how we're going to use it. But if we can't set the standards on this, I don't know that we can expect anybody else to behave decently. So thank you for that, Jill.
I think it's great that we have diversity, but how do we deal with sometimes being accused of tokenism? Because I think it's not enough to bring minorities. We have to convince people that we actually deserve to be there and that we don't have to be the best of the best. We also, the medians, not so good. We deserve to be that. What can we do? Especially because many times we are dealing against unconscious bias. So people don't think we are there because we shouldn't be, because they don't see people like us. So what do you think we can do to address that?
Yeah. So what I've shown, particularly with the awards, I've shown that because that's what the society celebrates, but that's very much the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, at the moment, one of the main reasons there aren't any female gold medal winners is it's partly generational and partly all for the kind of reasons we've been hearing. Even the women who should have got that have somehow, we've got what we call a leaky pipeline. So, well, I hope that's partly what the Women in Statistics group is going to be thinking about, but also diversity group. It's partly about encouraging people having opportunities. I mean, I'm very lucky because it would never occur to me at a junior age that this was a possibility, even though I was good at stats, I was involved, I got into things. So it's partly role models. I think it's partly about having events like this. And then also, and I've only just started reading it, but what has been certainly heavily tweeted at Imperial by Jess Wade, who's absolute champion of women in Wikipedia, is Angela Sarni's book, Inferior, which I've only just started, but I think it's a very cogent analysis of why there are fewer women, and she's just got her book Superior coming out, which I think looks at the race issue. So I think it's partly looking at some of the serious science and then thinking, with the RSS, it's what can the RSS do about it? But I think chip in as well, what would be helpful for your generation? Because it's got to be addressed at every level. And calling out bias. If you know it's there, call it out, or speak to people in society, say, how can we call that out? Sometimes it's just a comment, other times it's much more deep-rooted.
So firstly, I wanted to say thank you for asking me to talk today and giving me the opportunity to speak at this Women in Stats event. So this is really interesting, actually, and as I was sat there, I've always thought that the statistics world is very small. So And also when I was thinking about my talk, I was reflecting, what do I want to talk about today and what do I kind of want to put across? So I thought back, I've always been influenced by strong women. So in the 80s, when I was at primary school, it was a cartoon character and I wanted to be a long-distance lorry driver. So that was my influence then. And then at school, I was more interested in maths and kind of thought that I wanted to be an accountant. I didn't actually like stats at school. It wasn't taught very well, and I just didn't get it. But I went on to do maths, and my maths teacher actually encouraged me on to go to Newcastle University, which kind of gets a bit strange actually, because my supervisor there was Jane Hutton. So it's quite funny, and so it's quite interesting. I'm up first after that, and Jane actually, when I first went to university, I wasn't sure I wanted to stay, and encouraged me to carry on in my first year, and then also actually encouraged me to go on and do a PhD because I didn't know what I wanted to do next. I was still kind of exploring what I wanted to do, and then when I was at Lancaster, I was really lucky as well because I my supervisor was Mandy Chetwynd. So we've got strong women throughout that have guided me and helped me work out what I want to do. And then again, Mandy kind of encouraged me with the links with Lancaster and AstraZeneca to take the jump into industry. So, you know, I'm an accidental statistician, really. And then at AstraZeneca, I was employed, another strong woman there as well, and guided me. So then I sort of stepped back and thought, well, how has stats changed my life? I accidentally became a statistician. And so I kind of reflected that on a bit more. So when I first started at AstraZeneca, I worked on a 10,000 patient breast cancer study. And at the time, it was where it was being the results of the first survival analysis were being presented. And I was involved in analysing that trial. And it's became a gold standard in the treatment of breast cancer. So actually, being a statistician has positively impacted other people's lives. I never thought that was possible. And then I've also worked in infection area as well. Had the pleasure of kind of working with lots of very talented clinicians, medics, scientists that actually are statisticians, really. They kind of understand it a lot, and I've learnt a lot from them as well. And so, again, kind of helped work on a compound that was a treatment for MRSA. And when my father had a triple heart bypass, he ended up having MRSA. And it's kind of then realised, actually, again, what I'm doing as a statistician impacts people's lives for the positive. So, yeah, it was quite revolutionary to me. And then also, what have I got from being a statistician? Well, I've worked with some really, really interesting people. I'm always learning. Every single project I work on, you can learn from the different people that you have interactions with. So I feel like I've been really lucky. I've been 17 years in now, and I still really enjoy what I do. And I've still got that opportunity to do something new. I'm always learning. I'm always solving problems. So I thought that's what I'd just like to share today.
Hi, thank you for inviting me today. So I finished my tenure on the YSS, and at that point they were looking for someone to take over the RSS representative on the Women Mathematics Committee of the LMS. So I did that, and I joined, I think it was the end of 2016, 2017. And this is a really fantastic committee. They've done some fantastic stuff. So I just thought I'd tell you a bit about what they've done and what they're currently doing. So in 1999, the council thought, what can we do to retain women at every stage of their careers? We're losing people. So they set up this committee to raise the profile of women, support women, improve practices in the community, and collect and disseminate data, and also to collaborate with other societies like the RSS. So they developed several key things, and in 2016 they got the inaugural Royal Society Athena Prize for advancing diversity within their community because of all the fantastic stuff they've been doing. So one of the things that they wanted to do was to raise the profile of women. So to start with, they instigated the annual Mary Cartwright Lecture, named after the first woman president of the LMS. And this is for senior women, to give them a platform to be invited to speak. And the next event is on the 5th of April this year. Women in Mathematics Days are an annual event, and I guess that's next week is the next one. And that's for women at different career levels, so postgraduate upwards, to give them a chance to speak in a safe environment, as well as be exposed to more senior people and help with networking. And Girls in Maths. So these are aimed at people up to A-level, and they water bid annually. Anyone can apply for a grant to put on an event, and that actually, we get too many applications. This is really popular that people want to put on these events for girls in maths. And it's trying to get women interested in maths from an early age, and it is important to start young, to get them enthused and keep them going. So at every stage of someone's mathematical career, the LMS is trying to give them opportunities and raise them up. I think about May time will be the next call out for people to put applications in to run a Girls in Maths Day and the Women of Mathematics Day. And they're just really good. And across the country, these events are going on, so it's not just everything based in London. Grants. So the committee, as part of trying to help people in their careers, there are caring supplementary grants of up to £200. So if you need to attend a conference or an event, or you've been invited to visit some institution and you need a bit of help with your childcare costs, then you can apply for these grants. And the Grace Chisholm Young Fellowship is for someone who's maybe on a career break, and they can be attached to a department. The department gets some money on top of this amount, and it helps them to continue their career. When they're ready to step back into it, they've got this fellowship on their CV, and they've kept their professional development growing. The hope is that these become redundant, because conferences should be giving childcare grants, departments should be doing these things. It should be necessary for the LMS to support women this way. It should just be done without thought. My institution has, in the last month, said that they will do this sort of thing and give you £200 if you're attending a conference, which is great. And these grants are not just for women, these are for anyone, any parent or carer that needs this. It's not just a wee wifey issue, it's anyone who is looking after children that might need some help. And that's important too. It's not just for women, it should be a thing that it's not a woman's thing, it's everyone's thing. Everyone wants to work flexibly, and everyone should have these opportunities to do that and be supported. So I think these are fantastic. So in 2008, there was a statement on women in mathematics, which is on the LMS website, to make it really obvious what they want to do to support women in mathematics and make sure that everyone knows that it's a really important issue. The programme committee of the LMS added a question to say, what are you doing if you're applying for a conference funding? Are you looking at women? Are you making sure that you're doing this? And they knocked people back if they weren't, so that it's better that if you have to ask this blatant question, they have to think about it. It's not just the same men inviting the same men to speak. You're thinking about, what about the women? What about diversity? And this does help. In 2008, the Women of Mathematics Committee came up with a good practice scheme, which is to help departments encourage good practice in supporting women and diversity within their department. And they also help with Athena Swan applications. So they, in 2012, developed a benchmarking survey, and they got data from all the departments about women at different career stages and what good practice was, and they published this in the February 2013, which was launched at the House of Commons. And I think it was a good wake-up call for a lot of departments, and a lot of them then came forward and wanted to hear about the good practice scheme, and they do workshops, because it highlighted what needs doing and what the problems were. And if you don't get this data, if you don't look at it, if you don't tell everyone about it, then it's not known. So it's really important that we know this information and then we do something about it. And I think there's over 60 departments registered with the Good Practice Scheme, and they run the committee runs workshops to help departments address any issues they may have in making sure that women are supported and to get their Athena Swan. This was published in 2017, I think, and it's just a page of advice on diversity at conferences and seminars. And it's nothing unexpected, but it is something obvious that you can give someone who's running a conference to say, have you thought about this? Write a really long list of people and you will get more people involved, and just broaden your base. It's just got very simple suggestions, but just to help you think about it. And don't always just invite the same 2 senior women because that's on your list. It's like, think about it broader. If you broaden who you want to think about, then you will get more diversity, and you will want to invite people that maybe you didn't think of in the first instance. And also to engage with the young, like YSS. If you spoke to the YSS, they're very enthusiastic. They'll give you loads of information back and suggestions about people to speak. So it's just about making sure, give people obvious advice sometimes does help, and because, yeah, they're clearly missing it. And this is a project that's been going on for a little while, and this was launched, this website, in May last year, I think. It's the success stories. There's about 60 profiles here of different people from different backgrounds, and if you're looking for someone who's got a similar career path to you or different issues, there's a whole range of different people people you can read about. And it's just great that it's celebrating the diversity. This is not just about women, there's men on here too, but it's a celebration of achievements of women and other people in mathematics. And this is a lovely project. And if it's going to continue this summer, so if you have anyone to suggest, then do have a look and email the committee and you can have a look at these people. But it's lovely just to have a big page of people who've done some good stuff. And if you're organising a conference, then you can always have a look at that and find some for good mathematicians. So in the future, the committee does a lot of work on sometimes just drawing attention to the fact that, I think it was in the last RAE, they said there's only men on this panel, so they drew attention to that. And other things, is just this committee is just there to just give a nudge sometimes, it's all you need, and it's really important. And they are branching into not just women, but thinking about diversity across the board. And it's sort of broadening its remit, the committee. And with their online success stories project, and continue with collaborations. And we've been speaking to the RSS Diversity Committee about a project that we'd like to do. And also the Women in Data Science group. Hopefully we'll have there's going to be some crossover in the committees there. So it's just about all working together. And this committee's done such good stuff that I think it's really a model that we can look at for what the RSS can do as well. But yeah, they're very enthusiastic, and yeah, you can't fault what they've done over the last 20 years.
There are lots of women around. That's quite a unique experience in our field. So yes, I'm a PhD student at the MRC Biostatistic Unit at the University of Cambridge, and I'm very honored and happy to introduce the Women in Data Science and Statistics Special Interest Group that was just formed a couple of days ago, literally. All right. So let's start by stepping back and just check on the numbers. I mean, we're all numbers people here, so I think that that's quite important. So people from the London Mathematical Society were generously, I would say, shared some numbers with us. I wouldn't like to go through each and every single line here, but the take-home message is that since 2011, we haven't done much progress with respect to women studying in mathematics from A-levels till lectureships. You can see the numbers here and here as well. With regards to our Royal Statistical Society, we can, as Amaka recently said, she shared some data that were from which we derived that the percentages of women and men are pretty much balanced, but that's not the case in older age groups. That was supposed to be greater than 40. Sorry, the latte doesn't work always. All right, in terms of Goy medals, as again our president mentioned before, we have only 6 women since 1936 that won the bronze ones, 4 that won the silver, one of which is my supervisor, Professor Sylvia Richardson, who sends her regards and the best wishes for the new president here, and none has won a gold medal, and that's since 1892. So, I consider these numbers as an action so far, and here we come with a reaction, and that's Women in Data Science and Statistics group that we came up with, the idea that we came up with quite recently. Actually, here I need to say that Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter, who was the previous president here, has got some credits with respect to the name, because I was thinking at the beginning to name the group Women in Statistics, and he was like, data science, you know, you should consider that, it's a broad field, people like it, it's, you know, just use it and it will work, and apparently indeed. So yes, thanks to David for that. In terms of background, we are supposed to bring together women that studying and working in the field of statistical science. We would like to increase the visibility of women in our field, to advocate for opportunities, to support women, and to share positive experience, actually, though I'm quite sure that each and every one of us in here has experienced bad things as well, just because we're women. Okay, in terms of officers, Professor Sofia Olhede was very generously accepted to be the chair. I'm the secretary, and we have 9 members, sorry, that they're quite balanced with respect to industry and academia. And I would like to say that we would also like to collaborate with a fellow group from American Statistical Association, because again, the numbers that I showed at the beginning are, with respect to the United Kingdom, but unfortunately that's not a United Kingdom problem. The problem is more general, it's a global one, so we would like to liaise with fellow societies and to try to figure out what are we supposed to do in order to deal with this problem from now on. And I would like to thank you. I will not talk much because I know that after this session it's the drinking section, so yeah, I will just don't bother.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, and thanks to all of the speakers. And I'm delighted to see the group being set up. But one of the issues with using this phrase data science, I think, as Fatima said, is that actually it means lots of different things to lots of different people. But one of my worries is the way that it seems to be interpreted by some, including some who are setting agendas and syllabuses. It's very much about the computing route into data science. So, for example, the government introduced a new A-level, computing A-level, specifically because they thought that that was an appropriate response to future needs for skills in data. That is the most gendered A-level, more than physics, more than maths. It is the most gendered A-level that there is. And if we allow that narrative to continue, that the route into data science is through gendered subjects, then we're storing up a real problem for the future in this sense of, what's the future look like? So what can those of us who are currently from different backgrounds involved in statistics and data science, how can we address that? How can we stop this problem getting worse?
Yeah, that is a very good question. And I guess that's the main thing that needs to be addressed, is that it's not, we struggle when we reach a certain level in our careers, but we have to make sure that people are coming up that path. And there is a huge leaky pipeline, which is one of the things that we're looking into addressing. We'll hopefully do that. But yeah, I think that's really important. And it's for people to flag is the main thing, isn't it? Because if no one says, this is a problem, you should look at it, then we don't know. So the first thing to do is note down what the problem is, and then start from there, which I guess is the first thing.
Yeah, so I wanted to say that data science actually is something that's becoming a bit of a buzzword within the pharmaceutical industry as well. Everyone's looking into artificial intelligence and machine learning. So maybe a way to kind of encourage people that it's something that sort of diversity, that females are getting involved in, is I'm interested in that as well. It's kind of another, and I'm finding a lot of the time when I talk to people who have come from a kind of artificial intelligence, machine learning background, we're talking statistics, we're talking the same thing, it's a different language. So I think it's actually good that there's a buzz about this, if that's what gets the young generation more interested again in kind of like mathematical, statistical, data science subjects, then I think it's good and we should try to embrace that. But I think, again, thinking back to and showing that there's actually kind of a female presence there as well, so the women in data science, I think that's important. So we're part of it and make sure we're still involved.
So I guess part of the problem is that girls aren't going for computing, and then partly is that that's a gateway. So my thought is that with all of these pipeline issues, they should be addressed at multiple levels. So partly it's why aren't they doing it in schools? And I know there's lots of initiatives, my niece was going off on one, I think, on coding for girls. But whether they necessarily need to computing at school as part of that is another matter. So the question is, what alternatives might there be? So it's computing or something equivalent. Because it's a real shame in anything if a choice you make early on unnecessarily bars you. I mean, some things you've got to have So I think it's finding alternative routes. And then I guess if the role models change, then it may stop being quite so gendered, but that's a longer term solution. But, okay, and apologies, I actually missed when you spoke the very first thing about what the most gendered A level was, and I thought, oh, I wonder which that was, so that was what threw me.
Thank you. We've got a new head of data science, a new role formed at Phastar where I work, so we've recognised that's a need. We've had like the companies we support ask for that, and our new head is a female. So that's kind of a good role model to kind of promote and show that that's an opportunity for girls as well.
So, in my opinion, that problem is quite circular in the sense that where you're in your teenage/school years, and you check, for example, the list that the president showed before, and since again late 1800s and till today, you find only 4 women being awarded or none, then you actually also feel that maybe that's not the best place for me, right? So that induces a bias. So it may, and of course, there are the scholars, for example, or humanities, where women thrive. So, for example, back in the day, if I were a student again, I'm not sure whether I would have chosen the same path, because apparently there is some bias, and we've been discriminated against just because we are women, right? So that's why I think that it's important for us to advocate for our role as females in this particular scientific field. And that's also, and I also think, and that's one of the action points of our new special interest group, we would like to go to schools and to create videos where we say that, you know what, it's absolutely fine to do that, you can do that, men are not superior to you from whichever perspective you try to think, and that problem can be solved so long as we want to and so long as we recognize that as a problem. So that's what I would suggest.
Thanks very much. Any other questions?
Hi, sorry, what we talked about the pipeline just reminded me of what I heard from someone, which is the water can fix the leaky pipeline. And we are talking about empowering girls and telling them that it's possible, but I haven't heard much about reverse, which is saying to people like, you can't behave like that. It's not okay to create environments that are hostile to women, especially in computing and other areas. So what's your take on let's say, a more proactive thing, not just saying to girls, you can do that, but also saying to boys and other people, you can't actually do that, that's not acceptable, that's not okay. Sorry, I'm bringing an elephant into the room, I know, but that's something I'd like to discuss as well.
I mean, from my perspective and my experiences within the industry I've worked in, I've never had that, it's a 50-50, there's 50-50 kind of male-female, and there's never been any kind of, I don't feel like I've been held back. I've worked with, it's kind of irrelevant, your gender, it's kind of your ability that kind of, you push forwards to, like your ability, and people are supportive with that. So I've personally not come across that, so I don't know whether it's different in other environments, and I've just been lucky where I've ended up. But I think because the focus is on a big, large team and like kind of what we're trying to work towards, it's kind of encouraged that kind of collaboration, really. So it's brought that out. So we're working towards a common goal. So my experiences have been positive.
Yeah. It should be completely unacceptable for someone to have that thought. And yeah, I work part-time and I have kids, and I have had someone say something to me that I thought, you can't say that to me. And I said it to a male colleague of mine. He was shocked that someone would say that, and that was the appropriate response, that it should be socially unacceptable for any men to make a judgment about anything to do with my career because I have children. But yes, it should be started much earlier on. That, I mean, I was never bothered in school that maths was my favourite subject, loved maths, and it never bothered me if someone called me a swot. I was like, yeah, I am, thank you. You know, I'm proud of that. But not everyone has that attitude. And yeah, we should maybe be thinking about that. I think that's probably for teachers in schools to be monitoring that. And I don't know what the solution is for that, but it starts, women not wanting to do math starts early. And perhaps the whole thing about males denigrating women for wanting to do math starts early. So yeah, it's something that actually, we never talk about that, especially not in schools. In universities, it is an issue and it's sort of been addressed. But yeah, I've never heard of anyone talking about that at a younger age. So yeah, maybe that's something we should be flagging to teachers when we're talking to them about bigging up women. It's like, can you make sure that there's two sides to this as it goes forward? And maybe that will help address this problem of computing and with girls not doing these A-levels, if we're making sure that the boys aren't saying, well, why are you here? So, yeah.
I've seen studies where girls say things like, I'm not good enough to do computing, I'm not good enough to do pure maths. And once you start digging, it's because they feel hostile, they feel there's an hostile environment to them. And I think it's great and marvelous, and we really should cherish that we have role models, but also seeing, and not just in schools, in universities and in workplaces as well. Especially in, I think I know many women that work in computing areas, for instance, and they complain that they have to put up with a lot of mansplaining, they have to put up with a lot of, let's say, not very pleasant things. But I always feel that sometimes we think it's just for women to sort it out, when actually it's not. I think it has to come from the bigger community.